everybody, and we're really delighted to have you all here.
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you, Priya. Very excited to be here and with the rest of my panel. There's Monique, Rodgers, there's Parusha, and there's Joanne. So you guys can all enter the room if you like. Before we begin, I thought to create our very own circle of care, I would ask Monique to lead us into a mindful, I suppose, meditation of sorts, just to bring us and center us. So let's do that. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anya. The idea surrounding, I spoke to Anya this morning, and I was just, thank you for being on board with it. It's essentially just 1 to 2 minutes of grounding. The idea is we're coming from different contexts. We have different stories, not even only in the wider perspective, but our very day, where we are now, different countries, different times, different conversations, different things that have gone on in our minds and with our bodies. And we use this minute now before we go into our discussion so as to ground ourselves and to connect to each other virtually. And so I invite you to sit comfortably if you aren't already there, and to align your spine. And I'd like you to invite a softness, a gentleness into your body, into your shoulders, into your back, into your hips, into your knees, into your feet, into your face. If you'd like, you can close down your eyes. I will. And I'd like you just to listen to your breath. Is it short? Is it shallow? Is it deep? Inhaling very gently into the center of your heart. Exhale. Release whatever it is you're holding on to. We're going to take 4 more breaths together. Inhaling. Opening your lungs, feeling your chest expand. Exhale. Inhaling, breathing fresh oxygen into your lungs, feeling your shoulders open. Gently exhaling, releasing all the stagnant part that exists inside you, the nervous energy. 2 more breaths together. Inhaling from your torso all the way up into your chest. Exhale. Inhaling. Your last exhalation. Feeling your shoulders release down, feeling the back of your head relax. And I'd like you to keep your eyes closed. We're 43 in the session today. And I'd like you to visualize 43 outlines, 43 bodies in a circle. 43 beings from different spaces. And I'd like you to envision a thread connecting from the center of your heart space, connecting 43, a thread going through each and every single one in the session, with the last part of that thread connecting right back into the center of your chest. You almost feel a sense of electricity just as the thread closes. Inhaling. And as you exhale, I'd like you to solidify this visual in your head. When you're ready, you can open your eyes. Thank you.
Thank you, Monique. That was beautiful. Thanks for bringing us all to the circle. And yeah, today's session that I'll be hosting with Joanne and Parusha and Monique is around creating circles of care. And we know that there is an urgent need to slow down, reduce carbon emissions, and take care of the planet. But without an emotional connection to nature, most of us are unlikely to care. And for too long, we've been disconnected from nature, and that's, we've neglected to care for it. And this is particularly so in a South African context with our apartheid legacy, where people of color have been separated, removed, and renamed, which has added to the complexity of this disconnection to nature, of issues related to land and ocean and a sense of belonging or not. So in today's discussion with Joanne and Parusha and Monique, we're going to try and interrogate how we can reconnect to nature enough to care for it. So I spoke to this a little bit, but there's a quote from one of our annual reports and the work that we're doing at the Beach Carp in relation to creating access for all people to enjoy our marine environment in particular, and the health of our marine environment is very important because we rely on a healthy marine ecosystem to survive. So at the Beach Carp, we've hosted many cleanups for the last 6 years or so. And what we're doing is to create awareness. We encourage citizen science, and we engage with participants to help us collect data by counting and logging the top 12 most commonly found items on our beaches. We call this the Dirty Dozen methodology. And this in turn influences people to change their behavior and find alternatives to those Dirty Dozen items. Additionally, and very importantly, we want participants to have fun and to enjoy their time at the beach or along the rocky shore and explore and get lost in the wonder and awe of our beautiful coastline. So what we're trying to do really is to build these communities of care for our marine environment. And that's really key to the work that we do at the Beach Carp. So without further ado, I'd like to start asking some questions and opening up the discussion with the panelists. So I thought I'd start with Parusha, and I'd ask her to share with us what she does and what motivates her to do this, to do her work. Thanks, Parusha. You're mute. You're on mute.
So I did the sound check and it was fine before.
Here we go, it's coming through now, just fine, Parusha.
Perfect. Okay, so I am working as an artist illustrator who is doing storytelling focused on African and Asian stories, and often they are plant-based. And I started doing this, I guess, because I was influenced by my creative community, where there's Tapiwa, who is sharing new flavors, African focus, indigenous flavors of ice cream. And I think that's when I started doing my illustrations. It was quite unintentional at first, but to work on improving the self-esteem of Africans, that's his way of looking at what his work is. And I started sharing mostly about what I call Afro-Asian experience, and sharing stories, nostalgic foods, memories, and they started connecting with other people, and even, started being called decolonial storytelling. And, it was me seeing like the connections between other people, connecting to the art, connecting to the story. So that's what keeps motivating me, that this inspires other people to also have, pride, and to interrogate what, level the colonial history and apartheid has gone into our psyche, our ability to imagine beyond certain boundaries, our dreams, and even our activities like being connected to nature, swimming, snorkeling, surfing, doing just a walk in a forest, and having pride in our food that we eat at home, and maybe don't have that pride when we eat out. So I think, and I'm currently working on a Afro-Asian plant-based cookbook, which will be illustrated. And so I just hope that it helps to improve also the self-esteem generally of people that come into contact with my work.
Thank you, Parusha. I'm really looking forward to the cookbook. And of course your prints as well. Your prints of food has also been an amazing contribution, I feel, and really a sense of pride, explaining those stories through illustration as well. So moving on to Joanne, can you tell us a bit about what you do and how it connects to our discussion here today?
Thanks, Aaniyah. Hi, Monique and Parusha. It's actually fits so beautifully to respond after Parusha's spoken, because there are a lot of overlaps in the ways in which we understand our bodies. And so I'm a relational researcher. I understand myself to be a brown, porous woman in South Africa. And for me, that means that I am becoming more and more aware of how our bodies are not entities in this world without prior relations. So what makes us who we are is embodiment, and that embodiment comes through because of our relations with time and place and language and other species and the histories that we have. So I am informed by that in my research as a PhD student at the University of Aulu. My research interest connects deeply with how we can pay attention to how some bodies matter more than others in this world. And when I speak about bodies, I'm not only thinking about human bodies or more than human bodies, so other species, but also really expanding our understanding of what a body is. So bodies of water, so drawing on Astrid and Neomanus' work as well. How do we understand bodies differently? And in doing that, how can we then think about education and research differently? How can it change the questions that we ask? And how can it help us to not rest in definitive spaces around what we think about ourselves and our relationship with the world? And then the connection of our South African legacy, where there is a rich history that speaks of erasure of certain bodies and the privileging of others. How can we make it less about a moving forward and a moving on in ways that doesn't pay attention to the past? So for me, it would be, how do we think about the relationships that influence how our bodies are in 2021? What are those parts of our relationships that we have with place and time and the ocean, for example, that speak to a politics that we can pay attention to in terms of how we even think about care? And I think that this is relevant specifically in our country, but it's also important that we don't cut up the world in ways that colonization or the legacy of apartheid in South Africa is only situated geographically, but actually how we all implicated globally in what it means to think about bodies in the world. And then with that work, I'm also a lecturer at the Center for Creative Education. I work primarily with B.Ed students, so those are the students who are studying towards a teaching degree. That's the exciting work for me because it is part of my legacy of who I am today. I'm still involved with partnering schools and also learning in practice, where we are not only thinking about what it means to distance ourselves in higher education and train and then go out into the world. So that's also another part that we need to think about. And if we start spending more time disrupting this idea of holding the world at a distance, so studying about becoming a teacher, then we are able to make connections with how it comes to matter that I, as a lecturer, notice who are the bodies in the space that are with me, what are the relationships that they have already that inform who they are and who they are becoming. And you know, a recent outing that we had with our first years to St. James Title Pool, which I'll speak about a little bit later, was one of those articulations of those moments where we speak about care and sustainability and the environment. And when we do it in such a broad way without necessarily paying the deep attention to the complexity of access and who gets to care and how care cannot be defined and generalized. But that if we spend more time acknowledging how care has come about in ways that allow certain bodies to care more than others, to linger with these questions about who acts out care, who's benefiting from care, and for what reasons, then it helps us to think about building care communities. So that's what brings me into the space today.
Beautiful, thanks, Joanne. And I particularly liked what you said about not contextualizing it for South Africa only, because if we look at our marine resources and our resources in general, you know, our oceans are very much linked to an entire system in the same way that we as South Africans are linked to the entire world. So Monique, over to you. And what do you do? I know you gave us a beautiful introduction earlier, but explain a bit more. And why do you feel that it's important that we care for our planet?
Thanks, Aaniyah. Before I even answer that question, I just what an honor to be on a panel of like 4 brown women. I feel like it just needs to be said. Like, you know, I have this picture of my mom up just in front of me, and I'm just like, we're doing it, man. We know we're doing it. So I am a movement and mindfulness practitioner, and how that ties into caring for our planet is that our caring for the planet is caring for the self. You know, caring for the outside isn't this idea of it being outside of the self, because what happens in our communities, what happens in, you know, in an ocean, you know, in the Pacific, it's relative to what's happening in South Africa. We're part of, we have these micro or ecosystems, but they all form a part of, this is, you know, our greater system. And so I try to bring this into my work because everyone has a mind, everyone has a body. It's this inclusive way that says whatever you do, wherever you are, whatever you look like, you can participate, you can action change too, because you have a mind, you have a body. How we think in the spaces, how we move in the spaces, who we move with, what we say, how we do that, that is, you know, this, I find that it's how we can empower ourselves. Because before, I mean, I'm doing a master's now, and I feel like I have the platform to say, but previously I didn't. I felt like I didn't have enough. I wasn't educated enough. I didn't have enough to say something. And now my degree kind of gives me the support. But, you know, that is something that I can say out of privilege, but that's not something that is accessible for everyone. And so I look at caring, I'm trying to connect caring for the planet and how that connects to caring for the self, and how that is very much the same thing, and that they're not these separate things that we, you know. So I look at movement as possibly the first most form of activism, because it begins right there. You know, it begins like how we are, even in this now, how we sitting, how we are responding to each other. That is, are we really listening? You know, listening that's how we can support. That's how, that's where it begins, is here. So yeah, that's how
And going on from that, Monique, we're going to be talking a bit now about care as a practice, and whether you can share any examples of how you incorporated care into mindful movement and what some of the results or feedback from this has been. I mean, we've worked together. You've attended some of our new moon cleanups, and I've really felt that touch, that bringing people together like you just did for the beginning of this session, really just opens up the heart and gets people to listen, you know, which is the start of caring for me. So if you could share some examples, that would be great.
I was thinking about this, and in movement, again, rooting it in movement, what care looks like in movement is, or how I said it is, care is prayer in action, right? So it's through how we are in that space. And so in the new moon cleanups, what we do is, it's very similar to what we did initially when we started the session. So instead of in a virtual space, we'll just connect via breath and a bit of movement, and how that brings us out of where, you know, kind of spiraling, you know, how it can be sometimes, and it kind of just brings us right back into our bodies, because that's where, I feel like that's where the infinite knowledge is, you know. So the work that I'm doing was rooted in that the body is your first home, and our home being body, community, and then our earth. And I try to invite that gentleness in the movements. So a gentleness towards the self, and a gentleness in how we are towards ourselves and to each other. It's like this anti-capitalist approach to ourselves in our lives, because what we've been told is like, how quickly can you do something? How much can you do today? And then there's this glorification of busyness. There's this glorification of productivity. And if we're not doing all of the things all at the same time and nailing it, then we're not succeeding. But through inviting a gentleness, into a softness, into our minds, into our bodies, like what we think of ourselves, what we think of the people around us, what we think of the place we're occupying, are we caring enough to extend that compassion? So yeah, it's the compassion to ourselves and a compassion to our environment.
Thank you. Beautiful. I love that, taking it from your body into the community, into earth, you know, so it's that extension. Thank you. Beautiful. So Jo, why should we care? Does it make a difference? And if you could share some examples of this with us from your experience as an educator, lecturer.
Sure. Can you see my screen? Yeah, okay. So I just thought it would be helpful to maybe visually share some examples as well. I refer to some of the outing that I took my first years on to St. James Tidal Pool earlier this year, with the amazing collaborative support from Nazreen at Argonaut Science, who focuses on citizen science education. And I think this is one of those moments for me where it matters where we start with this question of why should we care. We need to start with the we. So who is the we, and how does it come about? So again, you know, touching on some of the things that Monique was also referring to, that there are differences, that there are things that make us a circle. Even in the Zoom, we are humans. But I think for me, part of the deeper work around decolonization is recognizing the differences that matter, and how some differences matter more than others, particularly because of our colonial history, not only in South Africa, but the history of colonization on the planet. And some of those practices of coloniality has meant that there are certain humans who are still in positions of power over nature, who have access in ways that other humans don't. That it's created practices of extraction and erasure, and that if we start with destabilizing the we, then it means that we are more open to the complexity of how we even begin to care. Some of the examples for me in education is how these practices of these binaries of human nature means that there's already a separation, and how that influences how we research, and actually how education systems are structured. So it means that there is a individual human in the schooling system at higher education learning about the world which is out there. It already separates us, and it doesn't bring us closer together and recognize that we are in relation all the time. It then means that there's less reciprocity in terms of how we care for those who are part of our world. And when I say again those, I'm referring to more than just the human. And it impacts education, where we have subjects in schools that are science and arts, and we've got language and we've got mathematics. So we already are cutting up the world into these different parts. And so children are sitting in classrooms where they are given knowledge, which further reinforces the distant relationship that they have with the world. So rather than listening, like Monique was speaking about, and paying attention to the relationships we already have, even though they are completely different and many of them are damaged, we reinforce by making strong narratives about how we care for the world. Even in research for you and me, Aaniyah, we are registered in this faculty. So we are either in the sciences, which is already in a position of power, compared to whether you are in the humanities. So these structures that we exist in influence how we even begin to think about how we care. So going on this outing, I rely on inquiry-based learning. And it's not only using picture books that are for children or discovery books that are for adults, but actually using any opportunity to really ask deeper questions, not ones that we can solve in one moment, but questions that open up discussions, that complexify who's even in the circle and what are the different ways in which we understand the world. And going to places so that teachers, like these students, aren't put into positions of teaching children about the ocean, but that the teachers themselves are able to understand their bodies in relation to water. That for many of the students that I work with, even going near a place where there's high tide creates fear and anxiety for them. So we don't then fix that. We pay attention to how did this even come about and how do these differences matter. So that would be some of the examples of how we work. And it's difficult, discomforting, and hard labor work. And so I would always sort of initiate ideas about check how comfortable you are in the ways in which you're narrating, in the ways in which you're telling stories, because it means that there might be something that puts your story in a position that's possibly silencing others.
Thank you, Jo. Beautiful examples of care and practice of care. Parusha, food and cooking as a form of care is something I completely relate to. Growing up in a Muslim family and having my mom constantly wanting to cook and feed and being involved in that preparation, it's something I love doing today as well. So that's definitely a connection point for me. And do you have any examples to share of how care through food and cooking has made a difference and the relationship of food to land and sea, I suppose?
Yeah. So when it comes to cooking and eating, just from a scientific perspective, it releases oxytocin the more senses you involve in any experience. So that is the bonding chemical. And if you are cooking and eating on your own, I guess it can be a self-care activity. And if you are cooking and eating with others, it brings you closer and it also develops a sense of community. So that is quite a beautiful thing, whether you're doing the cooking or the eating, or even if you are in your garden, your hands are in the dirt, you can smell the, flowers and the grass and all the different, smells in the food, from that early production stage to the cooking and then the eating. So that's something that I've always I learned about a while ago. And the only other times you release oxytocin is when you have sex or when a woman gives birth. Then it helps to bond with your partner or your child. So cooking is actually a way to bond and brings people together in a very chemical, real way, because of the different senses that you involve in the experience, both experiences. And then the other thing about just sitting down and having a meal or preparing a meal and then eating with people is that it's a very therapeutic activity. So like we may, some of us go for talk therapy, it is not available for everyone. So it is need for like more therapeutic activities, such as, whether it's going for a walk in nature or going for a swim or decompressing with mindfulness and meditation and yoga. There's also a space for, this therapeutic activity of coming together and communing and, sharing your stories, your stresses, your daily life. And so that is a way of like food being a part of care. And I think also in terms of just being more compassionate and understanding the whole system of food production. Like I was mostly vegan for a long time, but didn't really understand the whole production line. That every vegetable and all fruit, every vegan, plant-based food has to be grown in soil. And then if you go to a supermarket, that soil is fertilized with animal products, bone meal and animal fertilizer. So animal agriculture is actually part of the land part of food. So and thinking about the seed, and you have to think about the actual ground that your food grows in terms of connecting food and land. It's like we often just go to the supermarket, and that's our point of contact with the first part of we're along the production line. So we believe that we're making good choices, or we can sometimes have an idea that because we are buying the product, it is like, for example, a person who wants to avoid animal products does not understand that actually back in the land, there is a need for the animal the animal agriculture, sorry. So there is no way to escape it, and that, just to understand that. And then in terms of our celebrations around food, I was thinking about it earlier actually with my mom, who mentioned about Thanksgiving, and that it is celebrating, it's a celebration, but based on the oppression and the theft of land. And we have our, Heritage Day is now it's been transformed into Braai Day, a kind of food preparation that, is this our heritage? Whose heritage was it? It's, done, braaiing is something that's done by a lot of people from different cultures, but where does it come from? What is the meaning behind, our heritage and, our being here on this land and celebrating with food, but a certain kind of food. Thinking about, why we're all here in this very multicultural country. And we have, we're at the tip of Africa, and this was a place for like trade and, colonization, and various people, slaves, indentured laborers, the people that were originally here, and then the people that migrated from other parts of Africa, and, from, people from Europe, people from parts of Asia, from the whole of the continent who weren't maybe originally here. I don't know who was originally here. When do we start counting origin, and ownership of this space, and what is South African, and what is African, and what is Asian? And we are now it's an impossibility to say that, what is real, from here, South Africa, because we can't remove all the influences from all around the world. And we have a very unique place here. So think through food, it will be something that will take time, but to get some, caring for our self-esteem through food, by embracing, and more and more maybe there will be places where you can get, I mean, even though maybe braai food is not something that every single person in South Africa would have, there's no way you can get it commercially. So you couldn't go and just have the chakalaka, pap, boerewors and potato salad or whatever. There's like Italian restaurants, French restaurants, pizza places, and so maybe over time there will be a thing of care where it will involve our different food cultures and understand, like bring in those different aspects of identity, food, land, care, and caring for ourselves by creating food and sharing food with pride, and thinking that we don't have to only have pizza, and we don't only have to have like Italian restaurants, that we could have something that is a chain, even though I don't like chains, but to have things that are also reflecting the different cultures in South Africa. So
as you said that, I thought of a chakalaka pizza. Anyways, yes, but delicious. Your point, and what it speaks to what Joe was saying, and even to what Monique was saying as well, and that is this relational way that everything, there can be no boundaries, it's all entangled essentially. We don't have that much time left. I don't know if there are any questions. I don't see any in the question box, but we've got some more. I've got some more questions and things for us to discuss, so we can take up more time. But if anyone has a question, please raise your hand. The next area that I wanted to explore is around care linked to a sense of belonging. So at the Beach Carp, which is the organization I founded, the nonprofit organization, we have been on this interesting journey related to this sense of belonging and recognizing how it matters which beaches we clean, especially given our South African history and the demarcation of beaches according to race, and how this influences a sense of belonging or not, and how this is linked then in turn to a sense of care and respect for a place. And I'd like us to discuss this some more in relation to your areas of work in mindful movement, in food and health, and in education. So I'm opening it up, and whoever wants to jump in and respond, please go ahead, and we can do it that way.
Lots of kindness in this group of waiting to click the unmute button. I would like to suggest that we start with Fauzia's comment, because she's also here. I'm just looking in the chat, and I think it really links in beautifully with senses of belonging. And I think it's so, there's a lot of tension around this concept of belonging. And I feel like at times we can inhabit spaces that we as South Africans have not inhabited before, which is an important move that we need to make. So for many of us, we find ourselves occupying beach spaces, cleaning beach spaces that we haven't had access to before as our generation. And then it can become an essentializing move where it becomes a step that then builds the future. And so then it becomes this forward movement thing of how do we get more children to the ocean? How do we get more student teachers to the ocean? How do we make the oceans more accessible? And there needs to be multiple threads of how we think about building a future that's sustainable for everyone. Because otherwise we are replacing a system with a very clear packaged plan that means that we are facing one direction, and it means that we aren't lingering. We aren't able to then notice other ways or consider other questions that we need to ask. So in thinking with Fauzia's example, where she is, like she's saying, she's teaching in an area where there are many, many challenges, and it's recognizing that for some of us, it's easier than it is for others in thinking about how we think differently about food, how we think differently about the water, how we think differently about our bodies. And that complexity needs to continue to be a part of how we think about the future, so that we don't fall into the trap of making decisions on behalf of other bodies. And so in Fauzia's case, like she's talking about being in a difficult environment, I would sort of go, what is already around the children in their daily lives that for them needs to be acknowledged as places of beauty, that their homes are places of belonging, that their school is a place of ownership and care, that their teachers are the ones that are holding them in the best ways that they can. How do we narrate better stories in environments where historically people have still, historically and now, had lack of access to other places? So it's about telling better stories and more affirming stories of places that have not yet been given the acknowledgement about what they offer to us as a society and as a global community.
Yeah, Joanne, as you said that, I also thought immediately of what Monique was sharing, and that is that also acknowledging their bodies, our bodies, as these beautiful vessels of care. So starting there and moving, as she described earlier, from body to community to earth. So that kind of direction of thought. I don't know if you have anything more to add, Parusha or Monique. We are like 2 minutes over time, but Jackie will stop us when she's ready.
Okay. Monique, do you want to go first?
Well, I was trying to find the reaction, but I don't think it's on this model of Zoom. I was trying to applaud, because that's exactly, it's totally on point. I wrote it down, looking at the homes as a belonging. What are we communicating when we're taking groups out and putting them, of course we need access to the ocean. Yes, that needs to be one way. But the other way is when we're not there to facilitate, where what's actually going on in the community, what's going on in the townships. And this, with mindful movement, the idea that it has to take place in a studio or in this really beautiful place in Hout Bay. It's that, what does that speak to? Who does that speak to in terms of the South African population? But that's why, yeah, I feel like maybe that was enough for now. Parusha, do you want to?
Okay, yeah, no, I basically was thinking about that, staying connected to the global community, and also our sense of belonging is that, we can learn from other people. Sorry, I don't know, can you hear me? Am I still? Okay, good. But basically, that sometimes we, focus on our different South African identities and belonging without seeing that there's so many parallels between all that has happened here and historically here, and even in terms of our food and where our food comes from and the stories that we may or may not know as well. And just I had to leave South Africa for many years in order to come back and also see that other people of color and minorities in Europe and minorities in different parts of the North America were prideful and they were embracing a lot of their food culture. Then that's how it influenced me. And I think that connecting with the global community does give us a sense of belonging, because there is so much in other parts of the world that are similar to here. So I think that is mainly what I was going to say, is that, embracing the fact that we are part of a bigger system here around in this, continent and throughout the world, that the sense of belonging can come by engaging more with our international community.
Thanks, Parusha. And that then brings our discussion to a close. I'm really sad because I've absolutely loved this time with all of you. But, speaking to what you've just said, the Beach Carp has worked closely with a poet, Toni Giselle Stewart. And the release of the poem that she worked on happened today. And it's part of the COP26 climate change conference. So, there we go. We have South Africa at an international conference, and we have the work at the Beach Carp being showcased through this poet. And there were 12 poems that are being released over the time of the conference. And I'd like for Trevor to please share the screen and the poem with everyone. as a closing to this circle of care for now. Thank you.
At low tide, the water pulls back, exposing the rocky shore. Bare feet step and scramble slowly over ragged edges into pools. Eyes search the crevices and hidden wells for straws, earbuds, chip packets, bottle tops. Sweet wrappers, fishing line, water bottles, light sticks, carrier bags, lollipop sticks. These totems of our fast consumption. Swimming with starfish and nudibranchs, growing with sea anemones and feather duster worms. A dozen dirty lifetimes wash into the ocean swell. First quarter moon. Before dawn, the harbor hums with engines switched on, ropes whipped back and nets held on. Fathers, uncles, husbands, brothers throw silent prayers overboard, asking the currents to run with their nets, to fill their boats, to feed their families, to keep the lights on. Out in the deep water, the men remember the stories of sea as living being who must be honored for its provision. The men speak of a time when whale was ancestor, just as cave was, and rain, and how rain comes from the ocean. A dance between sun and sea, evaporation. Water in air cools its breath, condensation. Clouds exhale to cleanse skies, precipitation. Rivers, soils, lakes take the water back, collection. An endless cycle of give and take, one we keep breaking, but have the power to repair. Full moon. This is False Bay. This is the bay of slavery and escape. This is the bay of railway lines. This is the bay of shipwrecks and fishermen. This is the bay of forced removals. This is the bay of tidal pools for whites only. This is the bay where Kwamata sleeps. This is Table Bay. This is the bay of Hurikwaho. This is the bay of canalized rivers. This is the bay of sweet waters. This is the bay of washerwomen at the river. This is the bay of trade and travel. This is the bay where our ancestors fought. This is the bay where our ancestors won. And deep below the surface, in the dark stillness we cannot see, phytoplankton absorb carbon, release oxygen, creating clean air for us to breathe. Third quarter moon. These tidal pools were fish traps built by koi hands, stone for stone. Now we swim with octopus and sea hare, urchin and cuttlefish. In the water, ordinary citizens become scientists, and the children of people forcibly removed return to learn again that the sea is our home too. So with paper and pen or an app on a phone, we record, collect data as we clean the shore that has fed us for generations. We swim, we dive and explore the world below, and with each wade into shallow waters, with each deep breath held long, we remember to ask, who walks with us? Who swims with us? Who breathes with us?